I'm tired of seeing people convert, or, these guys, they convert people into profits. That's what they're doing. Like that drone strike, that was a tragedy. People made money off of that. People made a lot of money off the Afghanistan war. We spent $2.3 trillion over there, or $6.4 trillion if you count Iraq and the rest of the Middle East. And all of that money, what did we build up there? Absolutely nothing. The people that made out were the defense industry and the Wall Street banks and Wall Street industrial insiders who backed them up. And so for me, like, one of the most frustrating things about the last 20 years for me was seeing how, on September 11th, New York City was attacked, Wall Street was hit very hard, and the American people came together and stood behind them. And for the next 20 years, Wall Street spent all of their time profiteering off of the wars and profiteering off of people. I mean, I can give you a great example. When I was in Camp Pendleton in 2011, mind you, this is after we just bailed Wall Street out big time with a bunch of taxpayer dollars. I had Marine after Marine come into my office begging for help because these Wall Street banks we just bailed out and that we stood behind after September 11th were foreclosing on them illegally and kicking them out of their homes while they were fighting for our country. And so you see just instance after instance like that where Wall Street just takes advantage, and war profiteers are the same people saying, one more day, one more dollar, one more Marine, let's stay in Afghanistan. It's time we ended that connection between money and war.
Right. And a lot of people who heard about this drone strike having actually not killed any terrorist and instead having killed an aid worker and his family weren't surprised by it because this had been the pattern for so many years in Afghanistan that either through some trigger-happy recklessness or some type of bad intelligence that was purposely misleading information spoon-fed to the U.S. for some other person's motivations had led to the wrong people being killed. When you were in Afghanistan, what types of problems did you see that were leading to these types of what they call a tragic mistake? But 20 years in, it's hard to just call it a mistake.
Yeah, this is warfare is confusing. It's hard. It's not like playing a video game. I mean, there is an enemy or there is an adversary who is trying to defeat you. They're trying to kill you. They're trying to hide themselves. There are civilians caught up in the mess. And really, I think that what we need to remember here is just this is what war looks like. People die in war, and it's not just service members, and it's not just, the military types. It's not just fighters. I mean, 240,000 Afghans died in this war. And so, we need to understand that this is what happens. It's not necessarily malevolence. It's just confusing. Whenever U.S. service members get killed, there's obviously a desire to have reciprocity so that it doesn't happen again. And there's a lot of pressure.
What's unique about this story, though, is that the big tech overlords at Twitter decided they would actually not let the public see this reporting. When the New York Post came out and said, we have evidence of these emails existing, we have this laptop, and other outlets more or less refused to cover it. Eventually, the Wall Street Journal did. I'll give credit to Mike Bender, who delicately kind of parsed what he found from the laptop and covered it. But it just once again shows that the media decides what the public deserves to know and tries to make those decisions for them. And I mean, there's more on the Hunter stuff. And I'll say this: when I was advising the Trump campaign, I said, don't make Hunter Biden a focal point. I don't think it's that compelling in the sense that we know family members of politicians often are corrupt and they often profiteer off of their family's access. It's nothing.
Was it a little awkward to say that? Who was in the room while you're
certainly
not
Trump
naming any
members.
names here, but there are circumstances where children used the last name of their father.
It did not seem to me to be the most compelling argument we can make. But further, I did actually think for most Americans, I have family members, friends who've dealt with substance abuse, and I think Hunter's somebody who's had a very troubled past. But that doesn't mean it's not important. There is blatant corruption here, and one thing that still is not really reported on by the mainstream media is the fact that Hunter Biden took a massive loan from the former mayor of Moscow. As much as there was this Russian hysteria around President Trump, it looks like, pay for play with bad oligarchs is, kind of party neutral, and people on both sides have apparently done it.
So journalist Drew Holden took Twitter on a trip down memory lane when the story first broke during Biden's campaign. CNN had brought on James Clapper to call the now confirmed scoop textbook Soviet-Russian tradecraft. Plus, Brian Stelter had a segment about how it was obviously fake. Holden also pointed to a CNN business reporter who called the story dubious at the time. NPR had a disclaimer on why they wouldn't report the story about Hunter, saying that, quote, "We don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories, and we don't want to waste listeners' and readers' time on stories that are just pure distractions." MSNBC jumped on the bandwagon and had Congressman Raja on to dub the story a, quote, "Russian influence operation," while Joy Reid called it a Russian hatchet job. Their senior producer also said it appeared to contain disinformation, distinct from misinformation. And even Politico played their own part in discrediting the story they now confirmed to be true, running a story that claimed more than 50 former intel types disputed the findings as, you guessed it, a Russian information operation. Now, 50 intel operatives did, in fact. So, 50 intel operatives did, in fact, say that it was a Russian disinformation operation. And also, what we need to understand, and it's difficult in this environment where the camps are so radically split apart, to believe that two things can be true. And we don't know yet. But I for one believe that all of the evidence indicates that it was Russia that obtained Podesta's emails and then leaked them and blew up the 2016 campaign through that narrative. That doesn't mean that any of them were untrue or not newsworthy. I reported on them. I don't regret reporting on them. The U.S. media should report on them, regardless of what the source is. The only thing that matters is, are they true? Can they be confirmed? And are they newsworthy? Are they relevant to the public? So, did Russia have something to do with Hunter's laptop? We don't know. We don't know enough to say yes or no. But what happened at the time is that people just said Russia, 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 to then sweep the whole thing away. And that is unfair.
Correct.
McDonough argued that because the privileges and rights associated with permanent resident status or citizenship are so profound that they can't be measured in federal dollars. And even though the bill has a major budget impact, it's outweighed by the gravity of the policy change. There is no precedent for her take. And taken to its logical conclusion, it would bar reconciliation from being used for anything remotely serious. She previously greenlit drilling in the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge. How can you measure the permanent destruction of the wilderness in federal dollars? But McDonough has done her job and offered her advice, however flawed it might be. It's now Harris's job to receive that advice and make a ruling as the chair. If Harris rules it in order, Republicans would need 60 votes to overturn that ruling. Now, Democrats will run into problems trying to do this because McDonough has an extraordinary amount of affinity from senators in both parties who love that she allows them to punt off their responsibility to govern onto her. But taking a shot at it is a political winner for Harris either way. And given Republican hostility to immigration, there won't be another chance to create a pathway to citizenship for 10 million people for many, many years. If Harris doesn't go for it, her immigration legacy for all time will just be this.
Do not come. Do not come.
So if you're Kamala Harris, that's not what you want to be remembered by in a future Democratic primary, is it?
Certainly not. And she's, I would say, botched her job as the border czar from the outset. She took a trip to Guatemala to deal with the root causes of immigration.
And she attacked them all for corruption.
Correct. And basically then we saw that famous line of "do not come," and has since not really engaged at all when we have a massive, refugee crisis on the border with Haitian migrants in the Rio Grande sector. She's just kind of punted it. I would argue that, yes, it would be in her favor. Do I think she's going to weigh in this way? No, I think she's very risk averse. I don't foresee her pursuing this route.
I think she is risk averse, but I am picking up signals that there is a lot of discontent about this particular ruling within the Senate because its implications are so broad and profound. And freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, right? So she has nothing to lose at this point. Like her path to the White House is almost foreclosed at this point, even though she's the sitting vice president. And so if she doesn't do something different, she's screwed.
Yes, I would agree with that on a personal ambition level. The one thing I would say is one of the biggest motivators for the GOP base to turn out is the idea of mass sweeping amnesty. So it's kind of a foregone conclusion that Republicans are going to take back the House. But if you want to make the Senate really come into contention, I would say go forward with something where you're granting amnesty to 10 plus million people. And
Right.
that's going to pull some people out of the woodwork. So I think that's a calculation the White House is going to have to make. And ultimately, I worked for a Vice President Pence. In my experience, VPs very rarely step out in front of and get ahead of policy recommendations from the president. So for her to do that, I would think she would need Biden's complete sign off and blessing to go forward with that.